afterwards, when the police investigation started, and there was the video of her going into his apartment, the family watched this and they said that this did not look like Lindsay. Lindsay looked drugged. She looked like a zombie, and they were querying whether or not Ishinashi had given Lindsay something in her drink in that cafe, because they said it was very strange that she would put herself in such a vulnerable position, and she just seemed to look like a zombie on this CCTV. So like I say, Lindsay went into his apartment, and I think the police were informed at 2:30 on the 26th that Lindsay had not arrived at work. I think this was 2 days after she'd gone missing. Of course, the people that she lived with had contacted the police at one police station, and the school had contacted the police at another station, but for some reason the two police stations did not communicate straight away, and so they didn't put two and two together. So the friends of Lindsay, the people that she lived with in the flat, had found the drawing that Ishinashi had drawn of Lindsay, as well as his telephone number, etc. And they remembered the conversation that they'd had with her about how she was going to go and teach this guy some English, and so they passed this to the police. Now the police didn't seem, like I say, in any hurry initially, and so I think 2:30 she had been reported missing. At 5:40 on that day, the 26th, some of the police officers went out to speak to Ishinashi. They looked up his history and they found that he did have something on his record to suggest that he'd assaulted a woman and he'd also robbed her. Now officers arrived at I think it was 7 p.m. Japan time. This was 10 a.m. English time. And Bill and Julia, her mum and dad, were obviously completely frantic at this point. They'd been told that she was missing. They wanted to know what was going on. And so the police realised that this man, with him having convictions, was quite dangerous, and they were not sure if there was a kidnapping going on or if there was some sort of hostage situation. So they needed backup. So the police arrived at Ishinashi's flat and the lights were all off, but it did seem that there was somebody there, and they knocked and knocked, but he wouldn't answer the door. So they couldn't get in, they didn't have a key, and so there was no answer. So they went to the neighbour's house and they asked them, have you seen a foreign girl anywhere? And they all said no. So they went onto the neighbour's balcony and had a look to see if they could see the back of Ishinashi's apartment. The only thing they could see that was a bit strange was his bath. His bath was outside and it was on the balcony, but it was dark and they couldn't really see much else. Now, in England and in America and in a lot of these places, baths are attached to walls. They are plumbed into pipes, but over there it's not always the case. And so it was easy enough for him to pull the bath out onto the balcony, but for what reason, we don't know. Police thought it was really strange that, you know, there was a bath on the balcony, it wasn't answering the door, but there was somebody there. And so they had police officers downstairs. At the bottom of the stairs, they had police officers outside of his door. They had quite a lot of police there. And then suddenly at 9:45 p.m, 2 days after she'd gone missing, his door opened. He came out barefoot, which is normal over there because they usually put their shoes on outside the door. He came out barefoot with a rucksack over his shoulder, and police explained to him, we need to speak to you about a girl called Lindsay. Now they couldn't arrest him at this point because they didn't have anything to go on. They didn't really know the circumstances, whether he had been with her, but they didn't know he'd done anything to her. And so at this point he pushed past police officers and ran down the stairs and jumped over like the bottom flight of step, the balcony of the bottom floor of steps, and just ran. And of course the frustrating thing is the police officers didn't have walkie-talkies, so the top police officers couldn't communicate with the police officers downstairs to say he's on his way down. and some of the police officers gave chase, but he was just so quick. So Ishinashi weaved the streets, literally. I mean, Japan has a lot of narrow streets, a lot of narrow alleyways and, you know, off-side roads, and it was very easy for him to take off. He was a very good runner, and he just weaved through the streets, making it very difficult for them to catch him, and of course they lost him. Now inside, they went into Ishinashi's flat, and they found this fairly empty. It had once been the family home, Ishinashi's family home, with his mum and his dad and possibly some siblings. I'm not sure if he had siblings, but a lot of the furniture had gone. There was only like a couple of bits of furniture in there, but the floor was just strewn with these empty cartons of pomegranate juice all over the floor. There was hundreds of violent manga comics everywhere. I've not heard of manga, but it sounds pretty horrific. And the little furniture he did have seemed to be all over the place, almost like a fight had taken place, like a fight had broken out. And when they did find Lindsay, she was outside. She was in the bathtub, which was on the balcony. Now, it had been dark, so they'd not been able to see when they'd looked across the first time from the neighbour's balcony, but she had been inside this bath, and she was gagged with scarves. She had plastic ties around her arms and her legs, and she had cuts and abrasions all over her body, even her feet, and it was obvious that she tried to defend herself. Now, Lindsay had done some self-defense, and she was pretty good at it, but she was no match at all for Ishinashi's black belt standing of his own martial arts. Ishinashi had cut Lindsay's hair. He'd cut it all off and he'd put it in a plastic bag. Lindsay's beautiful long brown hair, and he'd strangled her and broken one of the bones in her neck during the strangulation. He'd placed her in the bath and he'd covered her in compost soil, and a chemical used to compact waste, hoping that maybe her body would eventually compost in this bath. And which is why he was seen on CCTV on various occasions coming backwards and forwards from the hardware store to his flat with various big bags, and I think there was even a trolley that he used at one point that was found outside of his apartment that he'd had to use to transport all this soil to this bath in order to try and decompose Lindsay's body. The idea of cutting the hair off, I guess, was because hair does not rot very well, and so he'd practically shaved the head of all of that. So let's talk about Ishinashi for a little minute. Ishinashi was born on the 5th of January 1979 in East Tokyo to his parents, a mother, a dentist, and his father, a neurosurgeon. Had a fairly privileged lifestyle growing up compared to some in Japan, compared to a lot in Japan. And although the money over there does not compare to what it would compare to in England or in the USA, that neurosurgeons and dentists would probably earn, you know, they had a very good lifestyle. And he never had to work when he left school, you know, when he was at university studying medicine. He never had to get a job to support himself. And so his family supported him through when he went to medical school. But unfortunately, for some reason, he was kicked off the course, whether that was due to grades or whether something occurred, and he was kicked out of medical school. And so he went to Chiba University in 2005 to study horticulture. Ishinashi was 28 years of age. He was tall, very fit, and he was into his own martial arts over there. He cycled 25 kilometres a day and apparently never walked anywhere. He was described by people that knew him as very, very solitary, really. He only had a few close friends. And he did have a girlfriend, a Japanese girl that he'd been dating for 12 months, and she'd explained that there'd never ever been any problems dating him. It was just a normal relationship, and she'd not noticed anything out of the ordinary. And so Ishinashi had lived in this flat where once his parents had owned, and they were giving him an allowance of, I think it worked out at £600 a month, which is a lot of money. It's a lot of money in England, never mind over there. That works out at $760. So he did have a lot of money spare every month. I mean, I don't know what he spent it on, but you know, pomegranate juice, obviously. When searching Ishinashi's flat apartment, police found various drawings that he had done of other women, just like he'd drawn for Lindsay. And he'd put his name on and his telephone number and his name, etc. But why they were in his apartment, surely they were to be given to somebody, so they obviously didn't work out very well. So while all this was going on, and while they were finding the body of Lindsay in the bathtub, her friends, I think it had got downstairs to the other police officers, and people were starting to talk, and it was soon realised that they'd found a body. And so one of these girls had messaged her father in England and said, you know, they found a body. And then that dad then messaged Lindsay's dad to say, you know, just prepare yourself, they've found a body. Now that must have just been the worst. Finding out third or fourth hand about your own daughter being missing, possibly found dead. I mean, that just must have been horrendous. But then that was confirmed when Warwickshire police turned up at Bill and Julia's house in the early hours of the morning to explain to them that their body had been found, and it did look like it was possibly Lindsay Hawker. Now in the flat, they'd also found Ishinashi's passport and various wigs. So they were querying whether or not, whilst he was on the run, he was going to be dressing up as a woman to try and evade capture. And so they knew they had his passport, so I think they looked through about 300,000 out of 700,000 new passport applications to see if anyone looking like him or his description could be, you know, filing for a new passport, but they couldn't find anything. So I think the press had come and they'd settled outside this apartment block at this point, waiting for any information that they could, you know, put out there in the media, waiting for the poor parents to arrive so that they could capture just a second of them looking upset or sad so they could put this on their channel. I mean, it's just awful. So Bill and Ryan, that's the boyfriend of Lindsay, flew out to Japan straight away to see Lindsay and to identify her. And when they did get there, they were mortified. They were very upset, as you can imagine, and mortified seeing their beautiful daughter and girlfriend with all her hair cut off. She'd had such long hair, so beautiful, and to identify her and see her with all of her hair cut off must have been just devastating. I think her mum stayed at home because she just couldn't cope and she just wanted to stay with the other two daughters. 20 months after Ishinashi had gone on the run, the family was still reeling from this, and they still not caught Ishinashi. He was still on the run, and this must have been heartbreaking for the family enough, but they needed justice, and he was still on the run. And it was so annoying for the family to know that the police had allowed this man to get past them and to evade, you know, being caught.